Hey guys, tonight we start in the musty candle-lit corridors of 18th century Paris. The kind of place where the floorboards always creak a little too long. The ink is always a little too dry, and every document smells vaguely of boiled cabbage. You're standing outside a magistrate's office, one of dozens in the French capital, where decisions are made slowly, grudges are held eternally, and bureaucracy is practiced like a sacred art form. But tonight, something is amiss. There's a chill in the air, and it's not just from the cracked window pane that never quite closes. The magistrate Monsieur Deforges has just discovered that his ceremonial wig, his pride, his symbol of station, and quite possibly the most expensive thing he owns, is gone. Vanished. You probably won't survive this century, to be honest. Not because of disease or duels or bad plumbing, but because of paperwork. Endless paperwork. And tonight, there's about to be even more of it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your local time and location in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You ease the door open. Dust motes float like lazy ghosts in the candlelight. Desforges is pacing, his hands twitching toward his bare head. It's disorienting seeing him like this. Without his towering powder-white wig, he looks incomplete. Shorter somehow, less sure, like a peeled onion of a man. This is a disgrace, he hisses to no one in particular. A judicial scandal. His clerk Etienne is frantically scribbling in the ledger ink blotches on every other word, nib nearly broken. You peer over his shoulder. The title of the entry, Declaration of Disappearance, one official wig belonging to the Honorable Desforges. There's already a line item for suspicion of internal theft, and a checklist of who had access to the room. Etienne has underlined possibly the janitor. Twice. Desforges slams a fist on the table. The candlestick wobbles. That wig is the authority of this court. Without it, I'm merely a man in a bathrobe. Technically, he's in full magisterial robes, but his point stands. In the France of the ancient regime, wigs weren't just wigs. They were power, dignity, and the illusion of wisdom bundled in one towering, itchy accessory. You wander the room. Nothing else seems disturbed. No signs of forced entry. The inkwell is untouched. The wooden seal press still bears yesterday's decree, a ruling about goose theft. But the wig box, ornate, lined in blue velvet, is empty. A single lonely powder puff sits inside like a forgotten dessert. Etienne finally speaks. Should we alert the constabulary? Desforges snorts. They'll demand their own investigation into my investigation. We'll be buried in reports until spring. Still, something must be done. After all, how can court proceed without the official wig? A magistrate ruling bareheaded, preposterous. It would be like a bishop preaching without a hat, or a baker without a mustache. So the wheels begin turning. You follow Etienne as he descends into the record room, a narrow stone vault that smells of mildew and misplaced ambition. By candlelight, he pulls out the theft form C48B and the internal loss form D13D, carefully copied onto calfskin and stored by odor rather than order. Historians still argue whether this was the first time a wig-related theft triggered an administrative lockdown, Etienne murmurs. He folds the forms with surgical care and ascends again, muttering something about requesting extra sealing wax. Outside Paris is its usual sleepy din, carriages rattling over cobbles, vendors barking about moldy fruit, someone tuning a lute badly. But inside the magistrate's office, the gears of dysfunction are just beginning to turn. You glance back at the magistrate, who's now attempting to drape a small curtain over his head in shame or desperation. It's hard to say, and as you settle into a creaky chair warmed by the flickering light and the absurdity of it all, you sense it, the tiniest tremor of trouble beginning to ripple through the system. A missing wig may seem like a small thing, but in the tightly wound clockwork of French bureaucracy, even a lost hairpiece can send the entire mechanism shuddering. Etienne is a man of routine breakfast at sunrise, a single boiled egg, 3 strokes of the quill to start the day. You trail him through the echoing marble halls of the municipal offices, your soft footfalls blending with the distant sound of dripping gutters and shuffling slippers. Welcome to the Bureau of Civil Order, part archive, part purgatory. No one walks fast here. Not out of laziness, but fear of being reassigned, misfiled, or worst of all, noticed. Today, everyone notices Etienne. News of the magistrate's missing wig has already filtered through the grapevine of gossipy bureaucrats. It's not just idle chatter, it's a disruption. An official without a wig is like a document without a stamp, meaningless. You pass a group of junior clerks whispering near a filing cabinet that's clearly held together by prayer and powdered glue. One of them gestures, miming a balding head and exaggerated weeping. The others snort softly, then glance up and freeze as Etienne passes. You catch a whiff of vinegar and ink. Someone's been crying into ledgers again. Inside the planning room, the air is thick with smoke and silence. Piles of parchment tilt dangerously toward catastrophe. Quills lie abandoned in half-dried inkwells. A single black cat stretches luxuriously on a windowsill, as if mocking the tension in the room. You ease into the chaos. A senior clerk named Mademoiselle Baudry peers over her glasses. Etienne, we've had to halt docketing for the afternoon. The magistrate's headwear, or lack thereof, compromises all signed orders from the past 24 hours. Etienne sighs, unrolling a scroll with exaggerated care. I'm requesting a temporary override. The robe should suffice in lieu of the wig given the circumstances. Baudry sniffs. Article 12, Clause C. Wigs are non-optional symbols of legal intent. You know that. And she's right. You scan the tattered guidebook affixed to the wall. Proper attire for judicial authority. Underlined in red wig must be worn at all times while presiding, deliberating, or appearing near a window where judgment may be assumed. In desperation, Etienne suggests borrowing one from another official. But here in this paper-thin ecosystem rank and curl count, the magistrate's wig was a Class 3 full white curl, moderate powder ceremonial trim. Borrowing down would be seen as an insult. Borrowing up a dangerous social overreach. Historians still argue whether the wig classifications were actually regulated or just made up by wig makers with delusions of grandeur. You think as Baudry smirks behind her ink-stained hands. A new clerk rushes in panting. I've just come from the Chamber of Notaries. They refuse to sign anything until this crisis is resolved. They're calling it the Bearhead Affair. You blink. That escalated quickly. What started as a single case of theft has begun to unravel the already fragile fabric of civil order. Without the magistrate's approvals, minor cases stall. Without resolutions, payments delay. Without payments, tempers flare. The dominoes begin to fall. A messenger bursts in out of breath. The Market Oversight Committee needs permission for a flour seizure. A baker's been accused of short measuring his baguettes. They need the magistrate's signature. Denied, Baudry says crisply. No wig, no writ. The messenger groans, scribbles something on a scrap of parchment, and hurries off, muttering. You can just make out the words, everything's unraveling faster than a budget wig in rain. And you haven't even reached noon. You follow Etienne back toward the magistrate's quarters. The corridors now feel less sleepy and more unsettled. A steward pauses mid-candle trim to whisper about conspiracies. Two guards discuss investing in personal wigs just in case. You pause near a court painter's studio. On an easel, a half-finished portrait of Desforges in all his former wigged glory. The eyes are judgy, the curls too immaculate. It looks like a man who knew exactly where his headpiece was and would never lose it. Etienne halts beside you. "Do you know what this is?" he says with a dry chuckle. It's a crisis of symbolism. He's not wrong. The French bureaucracy is obsessed with appearances. An unpowdered head isn't just indecency, it's a threat to the hierarchy. So Etienne does what any reasonable civil servant would do. He drafts a memorandum. 3 pages, flowery script, 12 countersignatures. The final sentence reads, "Until such time as the aforementioned wig be recovered, proceedings must halt, lest justice be rendered." Follicularly compromised. And just as he finishes, a janitor wanders by and offers this gem. Maybe the pigeons took it. The room goes quiet. You all look at one another. And absurdly, it's not the worst theory anyone's heard today. By the following morning, the stolen wig has become more than a theft. It's a legend in the making. You stroll through the court's outer chambers where the scent of fresh wax mingles with the dread of administrative limbo. Desforges, the magistrate, is nowhere to be seen. He has refused all public appearances until the wig is either recovered or replaced with one of equal pomp and dignity. Rumor has it, he tried on a barrister's powdered cap in desperation and burst into tears. The truth is, a magistrate without a wig is like a clock without hands. It may still tick, but no one knows what time it is. Today's mission is clear. Understand why the missing wig matters so much. And for that, Etienne has promised to take you on a field trip to the archives of attire, a surprisingly real department. You make your way through crooked stairwells and into a room that smells like starch and a faint lingering mildew best not questioned. Inside, dusty mannequins sport an array of judicial garments from centuries past. A particularly stern tunic stares at you disapprovingly, while a powdered headpiece the size of a bakery loaf rests under glass. Etienne, ever the dutiful narrator of his own workplace tragedies, walks you through the symbolism. This, he says, pointing to a curled monstrosity adorned with tiny ribbons, is the Grand Magistral Periwig Class 1, worn only by judges presiding over royal disputes or major cheese fraud cases. You stare at it. It looks like it might bite. But our dear Desforges wore a Class 3. Etienne continues. Respectable, middle tier. Enough powder to show gravitas, not so much as to suggest senility. He picks up a ledger detailing the proper maintenance schedule for official wigs. It includes a note on acceptable louse removal methods, seasonal powder blends, and a warning never to store it near goose fat. Apparently, that was a hard-learned lesson from the Ministry of Agriculture. Historians still argue whether the wig's power came from the wig itself or from the absurd lengths people went to maintain the illusion of power. Etienne muses, tapping the glass gently. You look again at the preserved wigs. Some are yellowed with age, others eerily vibrant. Each one represents not just a headpiece, but a role, a hierarchy, a brittle sense of control. In a world of paper trails and honorifics, the wig was the visible crown of bureaucracy. Back upstairs, you find a clerk guarding a box marked "Emergency Wig," for ceremonial use only. He shrugs when you approach. It's been reserved for the king's cousin's cousin since 1748. Can't touch it. So Desforges remains wigless. Meanwhile, attempts to move forward with official court business have become farcical. Today's agenda included a dispute over a fence encroaching on communal grazing land, a tax evasion case involving a fortune teller, and a pressing request for sewage rerouting near the perfume quarter. All postponed. In the waiting hall, petitioners shift nervously on creaky benches. One woman whispers, "I heard the magistrate's head was cursed and the wig escaped." Another murmurs, "Maybe he never had a wig, and this is just a distraction from budget fraud." You note these down mentally. Paris may run on bread and wine, but rumor is the real fuel. In an effort to appear functional, Desforges finally sends Etienne to preside over paperwork from behind a decorative screen, so no one sees his indecent condition. His voice thin and muffled echoes from behind the curtain. This decree is ratified, pending restoration of ceremonial coiffure. It's not helping. At one point, Etienne suggests borrowing a powdered wig from an actor. The theater down the block is performing The Triumph of Agrippa this week. But Desforges, upon hearing this idea, responds with a scandalized wheeze. "I will not be seen in theatrical curls. They're made of horsehair. Etienne horsehair." You back away slowly. In an attempt to lighten the mood, someone sends Desforges a small bundle of hay styled to look like a wig, accompanied by a poem that reads, "If hair be lost and curls be missed, then wear this hay, though less than kissed." He doesn't laugh. You do. That night, as the last candles burn low and the clerks shuffle home in their felt-soled shoes, the wig's absence begins to take on a life of its own. Letters go undelivered. Schedules twist. A baker is fined twice by accident and simply shrugs. After all, who's going to contest it? Without the wig, the magistrate is nothing but a man with opinions. And in 18th century France, opinions unwigged hold very little weight. The silence in the halls isn't just quiet. It's the eerie calm of a machine that's forgotten how to run. And somewhere just outside of town, someone is wearing a wig they really shouldn't have. Morning breaks over Paris with a drizzle so fine it feels like damp whispers on your skin. The streets glisten with uncertainty. Somewhere behind a shuttered bakery and a broken barrel, a strange note appears, pinned to a wheel of semi-soft cheese. You heard that right. It's Etienne who discovers it first during a routine stroll to the records clerk's quarters. The cheese is just sitting there wobbling on a crate with a note tucked into its waxy rind. For the return of the curls, follow the crumbs. Naturally, Etienne pockets both the note and the cheese, though not without sniffing the latter for signs of mischief. Back in the records room, you both stare at the message. You read it again slowly. It is in equal measure cryptic and ridiculous. "For the return of the curls," he repeats aloud. Who writes this? You shrug, possibly a dairy poet. But the magistrate is far from amused. Upon hearing of the note, Desforges demands immediate cheese analysis. "It could be a trap," he exclaims, half wrapped in a shawl and peering suspiciously out from behind a cupboard door. He's taken to hiding during working hours now. His remaining dignity appears to be in self-imposed exile. So Etienne launches a small-scale investigation. You accompany him as he visits the cheese vendor near the Rue des Cloches. The man is barely awake, stirring a barrel with a stick that seems more ceremonial than practical. "Recognize this?" Etienne asks, holding up the wheel. The vendor squints. "That's a Ruelle aux Épices, sold 2 days ago. Funny thing is, the buyer wore gloves and a mask, smelled like lavender and panic." You exchange glances, promising. Etienne jots this down in his little black book under a heading that reads, "Cheese-based leads." The day spirals from there. The note's message, "Follow the crumbs," becomes an inside joke among clerks. Someone sprinkles breadcrumbs across the main hallway. Another tapes a lock of horsehair to the lavatory door. By lunchtime, someone sketched a caricature of the magistrate with a chicken nesting on his head. And yet, the effects ripple. Without the magistrate's full participation, documents start to backlog. A city inspector mistakenly approves the construction of a second bakery inside an already operating bakery. 2 marriage certificates are swapped. A minor nobleman is briefly declared deceased, then miraculously revived with an errata slip. You hear whispers in the scribe's lounge. Maybe it wasn't theft at all. Maybe the wig chose to leave. Others disagree. One young clerk with a keen love for metaphors and poorly written plays proposes a theory. The wig represents our institutional stability, its loss, a symbol of the rot beneath. No one listens to him, of course, but you scribble it down. Could be useful later. Historians still argue whether the cheese note was a prank, a genuine clue, or a coded message between rival departments, Etienne mutters as he carefully laminates the parchment in a makeshift frame of wax paper. At the day's end, Etienne receives an anonymous envelope. No seal, no return address. Inside a single white hair curled at one end. It's not human. Horse, he wonders aloud. You both lean closer. Definitely horse. The tension in the office is growing. Desforges refuses to enter any chamber that doesn't have at least 2 candles and a cloth napkin draped over his head. He claims it helps him channel the spirit of the wig. Etienne drafts another memorandum requesting assistance from the Ministry of Material Goods. They reply with a single line. Your query has been noted. Do not write again. By evening, you find yourself in a back hallway, surrounded by scribes folding documents into little boats and floating them down a drainage trench. At least someone's signing things, one murmurs. And just as you're beginning to believe the wig may never be found, a shadow crosses your path. A small boy, maybe 12, dressed in mismatched boots and holding a broom far too tall for him, shuffles past you and whispers, I saw a man with curls, dancing on the fountain at midnight. He disappears before you can respond. Etienne stares after him. You think we're being led somewhere? You nod. Or possibly nowhere at all. But one thing's for sure, the wig is out there. And the breadcrumbs, they're only beginning. Night falls like a velvet curtain over the city, thick, soft, and a little bit damp. The streets of Paris quiet down save for the distant clatter of wooden shoes and the occasional cough echoing off a courtyard wall. The rain has stopped, but everything still smells faintly of wet limestone and roasted chestnuts. You and Etienne are on the move following the boy's whisper about curls and fountains. The Palais de Justice fountain is your destination, a burbling stone fixture where pigeons wash and young couples meet to quarrel quietly. But tonight, it's empty. Just moonlight on cold water and a lingering scent of lilacs. Etienne sighs. It was probably nonsense. Children say the strangest things. Still, you can't help but circle the fountain slowly. And there, just behind the statue of Lady Justice, who ironically wears no wig, rests a peculiar object. A feather. No, not just any feather. A powdered feather slightly curled with the unmistakable aroma of rosewater and starch. Etienne picks it up with the delicacy of someone handling a sacred relic. Pigeon feather, you ask? He frowns. No. Ostrich. From a plume fan or a high-end wig. The plot thickens. And as usual in France, it smells faintly of perfume and poultry. You return to the courthouse the next morning with renewed purpose and a bit of dampness in your boots. Desforges has taken to sitting beneath a thick tapestry, sipping warmed milk, and refusing to speak unless addressed in verse. Clerks have begun placing offerings at his door, a piece of lace here, a curl of ribbon there. Some are meant as jokes. Some, you suspect, are not. You head down to the barber shop. Yes, there's an official wig maker assigned to the court, a man named Lucien who operates from a cramped chamber beneath the stairs. The place smells like lavender oil, musty taffeta, and frustration. Mannequin heads leer from every shelf, adorned with powdered curls, sprigs of feathers, even a few baubles for the truly flamboyant judge. Lucien looks up as you enter. His eyes are rimmed with powder. He hasn't slept. I heard he says, voice hoarse. The Desforges curl. Gone. A tragedy. He gestures to a small velvet stool. Sit. I will explain. Apparently, Desforges's wig wasn't just ceremonial, it was custom. 5 layers of horsehair, triple-stitched, powdered with imported starch from Vienna. It cost more than my father's vineyard. Lucien says, not entirely bitterly. You ask the obvious question, could anyone replicate it? Lucien sighs. Yes, but not in time. Powder takes days to settle, and the curls, they must be earned. Still, you press on. Could someone have stolen the wig from his shop? Lucien shakes his head. I guard my door like a hawk with hairpins, but I did hear something strange. He leans in, whispering now. A few nights ago, I heard a rustling. Not from outside, from the attic above. Etienne frowns. There's no attic. Lucien smiles grimly. Exactly. So naturally, you investigate. A hidden staircase, half-rotted, tucked behind an old cloak rack, leads to an attic so dusty it looks like a flour mill exploded. Crates, old garments, and feathers. Powdered ones. And in the corner, a tattered court robe, one sleeve missing, and a piece of parchment rolled and tied with twine. You unroll it carefully. It's a list. Not a list of people. A list of wigs. Each entry includes a name, style, curl grade, and most alarmingly, a corresponding number in francs. Etienne reads aloud, Desforges, Class 3, 75 francs. Baudry, Class 2, 92 francs. He gulps. Lucien snatches the scroll and mutters, This is a wig ledger, black market pricing. So now it's not just a theft, it's a market. Someone is reselling judicial wigs. Historians still argue whether the 18th century Paris wig black market was organized crime or just desperate clerks with scissors, Etienne says, almost admiringly. You descend back into daylight with the scroll tucked beneath your coat. A plan is forming. But first, you need answers. Back in the archives, you find Mademoiselle Baudry poring over her ink-stained documents. When you mention the ledger, she stiffens. I've heard rumors. Low-level scribes selling off disused wigs, swapping them like vegetables or bribes. Etienne leans forward. And Desforges' wig, she hesitates. There was talk, she says, lowering her voice, of someone making a political statement, removing him symbolically. Without the wig, he's powerless. You sit back. It makes a strange kind of sense. In a world where hierarchy is stitched into every thread, what better way to cause chaos than by removing the crown? And the best part, no one even needs to be hurt. Just a little theft, a little powder, a few missing curls. Tonight Paris is quiet, but the conspiracy is curling tighter like a lock of powdered hair in humid air. You awaken to a distinct sound, a gavel falling prematurely and without purpose. It echoes down the hall like an impatient sneeze in a library. Etienne has summoned you early. There's been movement, he says, adjusting his coat with an over-seriousness reserved for men facing either death or a particularly confusing breakfast. You follow him through the dew-slicked courtyard into the records chamber, where he unrolls a notice pinned to the clerk's bulletin board. It reads, "To whom it may offend, the curls have power. Too much. One less wig, one more voice." The anti-coiffure coalition, Etienne raises an eyebrow. That's either satire or sedition, possibly both. And just like that, the mystery of the missing wig takes on new dimensions. This isn't petty theft, it's ideology. A statement. Possibly a prank. But in France, even pranks tend to ferment into revolution if left in a warm drawer long enough. The message sparks discussion in the clerk's lounge. One young apprentice with an inkwell stain shaped like Corsica on his sleeve announces, "I for one support de-wigging. Let faces be seen. Let scalps breathe." He is promptly demoted to parchment flattener. Desforges, meanwhile, refuses to leave his room. Word has it he's commissioned a tiny velvet curtain to drape over his head while eating. Dignity, he mumbles through his soup. You head to the markets with Etienne, hoping the chatter of gossip vendors will yield fresh clues. At a stall where one can buy both candied almonds and minor slanders, an old woman squints at you. "Looking for curls, are you?" Etienne nods. She chuckles. "Saw a man last night wearing a fine powdered wig. But the man had no eyebrows. None. Just powdered brows drawn on with chalk." You glance at Etienne. "Forgery," he whispers. "Wig forgery." From there it snowballs. A chorus singer claims her nephew bought a magistrate's wig for a costume party. A chimney sweep swears he saw a man drop something fluffy and judgmental down a drain. A street artist paints a mural of the wigless court judges with teacups on their heads. Historians still argue whether these accounts were based on truth or simply reflected the public's deep-seated resentment of powdered wigs. Etienne notes scribbling in his ever-growing casebook. Back at the courthouse, the consequences are catching up. Without Desforges at the helm, several junior magistrates attempt to conduct court proceedings. One misreads a livestock ownership law and accidentally grants citizenship to a goat. Another finds a widow twice because he thought her name, Marie Dufoy, indicated two offenses. You watch as a clerk, desperate to maintain order, attaches a sheep's wool pad to his cap and declares, "I hereby restore tradition." It doesn't work. The wool falls off mid-sentence, and a nearby parrot belonging to a witness snatches it and flies into the rafters. You and Etienne retreat to the evidence room. Stacks of confiscated goods line the shelves. Counterfeit tax seals, a collection of illegally oversized buttons, even a box labeled unauthorized snuff containers. And in the far corner, a row of old wigs covered in dust. Desforges is not among them. Still, something catches your eye. A note wedged between two law books with elegant, familiar handwriting. You have made judgment into theater. So now the theater shall judge you. A wax seal beneath it, smeared but recognizable. The emblem of the Théâtre Municipal. Etienne exhales slowly. The actors. You're beginning to see it too. If one wanted to mock the legal system without openly rebelling, the theater would be the perfect stage. The pieces are falling into place, the actor's wig suggestion. Desforges refused the satire in the market. The missing curls, the drama of it all. You don't say it aloud. Not yet. But it's clear. This isn't just about a wig. It's about mockery. And to the powdered elite of Paris, that might be worse than a guillotine. The Théâtre Municipal looms ahead like a great frosted cake of stone and soot. Its facade is part grandeur, part mildew, its plaster angels grimacing, as if they too have read the latest reviews. It smells of old velvet, cheap perfume, and crushed dreams, which is to say, it smells exactly right. You and Etienne stand before the stage door, a modest wooden entry just wide enough to admit one fragile ego at a time. He knocks. Nothing. Then from within a crash, followed by laughter, the clatter of a tambourine, and someone exclaiming, "That wig was not historically accurate." You're in the right place. A young woman answers the door. She's wearing half a costume, 18th century court dress on one side, striped pajamas on the other. Her eyeliner says nobility, but her expression says rehearsal has run long, and she will not be taking notes. "Are you with the guild?" she asks. Etienne clears his throat. We're with the judiciary. She squints. Same thing. Inside the theater is pure chaos. Stagehands balance on ladders adjusting lanterns that may or may not be stolen streetlights. Actors practice lines with the hushed intensity of people arguing about soup. Props are scattered across the floor, swords, wigs, loaves of fake bread, an unfortunate tax collector puppet. You ease into the dark, dusty front row of the audience chamber, while Etienne approaches the director, an exuberantly mustached man, wearing a powdered wig so exaggerated it looks like a pastry sculpture. His name is Henri. When Etienne shows him the note, "You have made judgment into theater," Henri beams. "Ah, you received our opening statement." Etienne blinks. "So you admit it?" Henri waves a hand. "Art must provoke. We did not steal the wig. We borrowed it. Temporarily. As a symbol. Historians still argue whether symbolic borrowing constitutes theft," Etienne murmurs, scribbling furiously. Henri escorts you backstage to a small dressing room. There, under soft candlelight, lies the wig. Desforges's wig, resting on a bust, powdered, curled, majestic. Around it, reverent silence. We used it in a satire, Henri admits. One night only. A piece called Le Grand Décret, a farce in 4 fines. It was a hit. You ask, why take the real thing? Henri shrugs. Authenticity. You stare at him. He stares back. It's clear he believes this. Apparently, the production featured actors playing overworked clerks, shouting contradictory laws in harmony, and a magistrate who delivered every ruling based on the day's soup temperature. The audience wept, laughed. Some threw powdered sugar. It was catharsis, Henri says softly. For the people. Etienne, eyes wide, leans toward the wig. We must return this, Henri sighs. Take it. We've already written a new play. The Vanishing Curlicue, a tragedy in bureaucratic time. You carefully lift the wig. It's heavier than expected, like holding a crown made of powdered expectations. But then Henri holds up a hand. Before you go, may I tell you something strange? You nod. The day after the show, someone left another wig at our door. Not a magistrate's, a bishop's, unmarked. Just waiting. You and Etienne exchange a look. This may not be over. Outside, the clouds break slightly. A thin line of sunlight stretches across the cobblestones like a cautious apology. You walk slowly through the winding streets, wig cradled in an old costume satchel that still smells of mothballs and stage fright. Back at the courthouse, Desforges emerges like a ghost from his chamber. His eyes glisten as he sees the wig. Etienne presents it ceremoniously, holding it aloft like a holy relic. Desforges places it upon his head. The curls settle into place with a quiet whoosh of dignity restored. I am reborn, he whispers, and then sneezes. The powder is a little much. That afternoon, the court resumes. Cases are reviewed. Fines are issued. The goat is gently reclassified as livestock. All is well, for now. But you can't shake Henri's story of the bishop's wig. One stolen symbol returned, another one left behind. There's something in the air, and it smells faintly of lavender and rebellion. The courthouse is breathing again. Not literally, of course, though Desforges did claim between sneezes that he felt oxygenated by judicial purpose. The return of the wig has caused a ripple of cautious celebration. You wander through the office corridors where the usual gloom has lifted just enough to allow a few jokes about powdered justice. Clerks are humming again. One even baked a cake in the shape of the missing wig. The curls collapsed in the oven, but the gesture was appreciated. Desforges has resumed court sessions with renewed pomposity. He's back to swishing his robe at dramatic angles, delivering minor verdicts with operatic flair and demanding stronger ink. "My signatures must radiate finality," he declares. You might think everything is back to normal, but Etienne isn't convinced. You find him in the records room where scrolls lean against one another like sleepy conspirators. He's studying a map, not of France, but of the court's inventory, specifically its wardrobe assets. There's a new discrepancy. "We're missing 2 more wigs," he says. You stare at him. 1 from the Archive Commission, and 1 from the Ecclesiastical Liaison Office. You blink. "We have one of those, technically, yes. He's the man who keeps suggesting we turn the courtyard into a prayer garden." Etienne runs a hand down his face. These weren't just ordinary wigs. They were ceremonial, lightly perfumed, catalogued, counted twice a year, and now gone. You feel a familiar chill, not from the cold stone floors, but from recognition. The pattern is continuing. Etienne pins a note to the wall, "Vanishing wigs, week 2. Underneath, he draws a little sketch of a curlicue spiraling into the void. You pace the hallway, trying to think. The theater gave you back Desforges's wig, but Henri said something had been left for them in return. A bishop's wig. It was no simple prank, it was a trade. Which means someone is still playing the game. Historians still argue whether the so-called wig exchange marked the start of Paris's silent protest movement, or just an extended period of fancy headgear misplacement. Etienne mutters as he flips through personnel files. You decide to revisit Lucien the wig maker. He's pacing when you arrive, scissors in one hand, cup of cold coffee in the other. He hasn't shaved in days. "I was warned," he says grimly. "Told to stop cataloging my orders. Said I was making the invisible visible." You raise an eyebrow. "By whom?" He shrugs. "A man. Gloves. Lavender scent. No eyebrows." Etienne's eyes widen, the chalk-drawn brows. From the cheese stall, you're starting to see it now. There's a group, small, quiet, oddly well-groomed trading wigs, possibly mocking the structure of authority, possibly reshaping it from the top down. And no one's sure what they want. You return to the court just as Desforges is finishing a ruling about window taxes. He gestures dramatically with his inkwell. All shutters must open at dawn or face an audit. As he exits the chamber, a footman rushes in holding a bundle. For the magistrate. Desforges sniffs it. Lilac. Good. He unwraps the cloth and gasps. It's not his wig. It's another wig. Identical in size but subtly altered. Instead of the standard side curls, it has a spiral twist pattern known only to ecclesiastical robes. And inside the lining, a note. The curls belong to all. Let no one hoard the symbols. CFG. Etienne's brow furrows. CFG. You both ponder it for a moment. Clandestine Fraternal Guild Collective of Follicular Governance, croissant-fueled gentry. No answers yet. But Desforges is furious. Imposter hair, return it to whence it came. He hurls the wig into the nearest waste bin. A clerk gasps audibly. Later that night, you sit beside Etienne in the scribe's lounge. He's sketching wig diagrams, annotating them with potential affiliations. You sip lukewarm tea and listen to the building sigh. There's something brewing. Not revolution. Not yet. But quiet defiance. It wears a powdered curl, and it walks softly through the cracks of power. You wake to the sound of bells, too early, too frantic, and definitely not scheduled. Bells in Paris mean many things. A fire, a festival, a cart stuck sideways in a narrow alley. but today they toll for chaos. You arrive at the courthouse to find the main vestibule in disarray. Papers are flying. Clerks are arguing in whispers loud enough to echo. The janitor has fainted again, and Desforges is seated rigidly in his chair, arms folded like a defrocked statue. He is wearing a hat, not a wig, not even a proper hat. A borrowed tricorn from the constable's lost and found, still marked with a chalk X from inventory. You stare. Etienne stares. Everyone stares. Desforges' face, pale beneath the brim, simply says, "It's happened again." You already know what he means. The wig, the proper one freshly returned from the theater, trimmed and powdered, has vanished a second time. This is no longer coincidence. Historians still argue whether this second theft was part of the original plot or the beginning of a copycat movement. Etienne says as he pulls out his tattered notebook, now held together with twine and ink smudges. You help him assemble the facts: Desforges' original wig, stolen, recovered, now stolen again. Archive Commission wig missing. Ecclesiastical liaison's wig missing. Theatrical wig trade confirmed. Anonymous group active, philosophical, fond of lilac. Etienne draws a circle on the wall and begins connecting names with ribbon. "They're not just mocking us," he says. "They're testing us. Like performance art crossed with administrative sabotage. The rumors are spreading too." One clerk claims to have found her wig powdered with crushed mint and stitched with poetry. Another swears a man at the cafe doffed his hat and revealed a full curl set stolen, he's sure of it, from the registry of weights and measures. There's even talk of wig manifestos left inside baguettes. You follow a lead to the city's legal library, a damp Baroque building where even the mice walk in silence. An elderly librarian hands you a scroll titled "Treatise on Hair as Social Currency." Inside is a marginal note that reads, "The wig is the crown of the unarmed king." Etienne stares. That's not metaphor. That's recruitment language. At lunch, the courthouse cafeteria is buzzing. No one wants to sit near the window for fear of being wig-watched. The bread is underbaked. The butter has been labeled notary grade. Tensions are high. Desforges calls a closed-door meeting with department heads. You and Etienne eavesdrop from a utility closet, sharing a bench with a mop named Philippe. Inside, the discussion spirals. One official suggests mandatory head inspections. Another proposes personality-based wig assignments. Someone else mutters something about powdered decoys and is immediately shushed. Desforges pounds the table. "We are not a circus." A pause. Someone coughs. Well comes a soft voice. "We are at the moment missing most of the ringleaders and performing in wigs that aren't ours." You and Etienne exchange looks. The real issue isn't just missing hairpieces. It's that no one knows who has authority anymore. If wigs can be stolen, forged, or impersonated, then rulings become fluid. Lines blur. Respect becomes performance. That night, a new letter appears, pinned with a pearl-headed hairpin to the public notice board. "We take only what is taken too seriously. We curl what you straighten. We powder the cracks." The gentle frizz, Etienne reads it aloud solemnly. They've named themselves. You nod. The revolution is quaffed. At home, Etienne drafts a quiet note of his own, memo. All decisions made without wigs in full compliance of class standards are henceforth noted as unofficial unless retroactively powdered. He pauses, then adds, "Postscript, I need a new notebook." And beneath that, second postscript, what if they're right? The building is still. The lamps flicker. Outside, the moon rests above the city like a powdered wig worn slightly askew. By now, the stolen wig saga has outgrown even the halls of the courthouse. What began as a minor inconvenience, some curls gone missing, a few hearings delayed, has turned into a full-blown phenomenon. And Paris, as always, is leaning in. You're standing at a newsstand near Pont Neuf, watching as a clerk purchases a pamphlet with bold lettering, "The Curl Uprising, a satirical account of justice unraveled." It's fiction, of course, mostly, but based on true events, based alarmingly on you. Etienne flips through the pages and groans. "They made me a villain. Says here I eat ink. You're not even mentioned," which honestly feels worse. Back at the courthouse, Desforges has retreated into silence. His second wig gone, he now refuses to speak without first being properly recoiffed. His temporary tricorn is gone, replaced with a voluminous scarf twisted atop his head like a souffle. Morale is unraveling. A hearing is interrupted when a pigeon swoops down and tries to nest in a barrister's toupee. Clerks begin salting their wigs before entering the chamber, in hopes it will ward off thieves or birds. The official court stenographer has begun keeping 2 transcripts per session, one for what was said, another for what was meant. Historians still argue whether this period marked the high point of judicial surrealism or the low point of courtroom hygiene, Etienne remarks as you both dodge a debate over powdered wig ethics unfolding near the law library. More wigs have disappeared. The Chancery's powdered bob, gone. The Treasurer's curled bun vanished. Even a powdered judicial beard worn ceremonially during tax season has been spirited away. You begin tracking locations, dates, types of powder. There's a pattern forming, subtle but present. Thefts tend to occur the day after court hearings that deny certain public petitions. Sewage complaints, unpaid widows' stipends, goat-related border disputes. Etienne begins to suspect that the gentle Frizz isn't just mocking the court, they're watching its rulings, responding to them. He draws a line between 2 dates and frowns. These aren't pranks, they're feedback. To test the theory, you draft a fake hearing notice. It's dull, bureaucratic, filled with meaningless words like adjournment and reclassification of district ink standards. You post it publicly. Within 12 hours, the magistrate's ink blotter has gone missing, replaced with a lock of curled ribbon and a note, "Too much ink, not enough clarity." Etienne stares at it. They're toying with us. The staff is on edge. A clerk mistakenly accuses a cleaning woman of stealing a judicial scarf. She retaliates by sneaking into his office and rearranging every single document in reverse alphabetical order. The resulting confusion delays the delivery of cheese licenses across 3 arrondissements. The mayor's office, which had been blissfully unaware of the wig thefts until now, finally sends a sternly worded letter. Restore judicial headwear integrity within the fortnight or face municipal reassignments. It's unsigned. Cowards. So Desforges calls another emergency meeting. You're there. Etienne is there. The janitor is there, though asleep and lightly snoring into a mop bucket. Desforges clears his throat. "I propose," he says, "we go undercover." A silence falls. Etienne blinks. "You mean, among the people?" Desforges nods. "We must rediscover dignity, regain control, find the Frizz, on foot, in disguise." And so plans are made. Etienne will pose as a wandering scholar, you a visiting notary from Avignon. Desforges will wear civilian clothes, which turn out to be slightly more extravagant than his courtroom robes and involve an alarming number of brooches. That night, the 3 of you slip out into the city. No wigs, no robes, just cloaks, boots, and a handful of questions. You start at the markets, then the bookstalls, then the square near the Milliners' Guild. Everywhere whispers. Someone saw a woman powdering a wig in public, then tucking it into a pigeon coop. Another swears that a bread vendor delivers secret messages via crust scoring. And then just before midnight, a boy brushes past you and drops a small folded card into your pocket. You open it. Inside judgment belongs not to curls, but to courage. Meet us when the bells chime thrice. G.F. Etienne exhales. Desforges sniffs. Finally. You look up at the full moon overhead. Somewhere nearby, a clock tower begins to hum. The bells are coming. The bells ring once. It's the deep, hollow tone of the old Saint Laurent Tower, echoing across slate rooftops and cobbled alleys. You, Etienne and Desforges, stand in a shadowed courtyard just off Rue des Dentelles, a place so forgotten even the rats carry lanterns. No one speaks. The second bell rings. A breeze stirs the dust. Desforges adjusts his cloak nervously, trying to look inconspicuous. He fails. The brooch on his chest glints like a small sun. Etienne eyes the surrounding buildings. This place is too quiet, he mutters. You agree. But before you can speak, the third bell tolls, and then they appear. 3 figures emerge from the gloom. One from behind a crumbling archway, another from beneath a canvas tarp draped over barrels, and the last steps out of a wooden cart stacked with baskets. Each wears a cloak and a wig, but not like those worn in court. These are flamboyant, asymmetrical, and laced with ribbon. One has feathers, another sports a tiny bell. The lead figure steps forward. Greetings, they say, voice warm but firm. We are the gentle Frizz. Etienne opens his mouth, then closes it. Desforges tightens his jaw, visibly fighting the urge to perform a dramatic monologue. The figure continues. You've come not because you seek punishment, but because you seek understanding, and perhaps a bit of control poorly disguised as curiosity. You step forward. Why the wigs? The figure lifts a hand. Because they listen. You blink. They're not ears, Desforges mutters. No, the figure says gently. But when someone wears a wig, they are listened to. Their words carry weight. A powdered curl is a louder voice. A curl means consequence. And yet, who decides who wears it? A pause. A pigeon coos as if moved. We took them, the figure says, because power cannot remain powdered and perched forever. It must shift, expand, ruffle occasionally. Etienne frowns. But you stole them. Redistributed, says another voice behind the cart. With whimsy. The lead figure smiles. Historians still argue whether what we did was theft protest or avant-garde civil service. We prefer the term aesthetic sabotage. You nod because honestly, that's not the worst kind of sabotage. They continue. We didn't just steal wigs. We traded them, shared them, brought curls to the uncurlable. A tax clerk in Montmartre wore a Class 2 last week, wrote the most compassionate audit of her life. A baker in Saint-Denis wore a chamber wig and raised wages. One woman wore a bishop's wig and got her well repaired without bribery. Desforges looks stricken. But the order. The order, the figure says, had stopped working. You just didn't notice. Until we borrowed its loudest ornament. You glance at Etienne, who is already scribbling in the margins of his notary ledger, wigs equals voice amplification devices is justice. Portable. You clear your throat. So what now? The lead figure holds out a bundle cloth-wrapped, tied with a twist of ribbon. You take it. Inside is the magistrate's original wig. Cleaned, curled, restored, and yet different. There's a tiny stitch along the inner lining, a single thread of red. A reminder. You may return to order, the figure says, but know the curls are watching. Desforges accepts the wig solemnly, placing it on his head with a theatrical hush. It settles like destiny, like defeat, like a warm pastry full of consequence. Will there be more interventions? Etienne asks. A smile flickers across the figure's face. Only if the curls become too stiff. Then, as quietly as they came, the gentle frizz disappears, one behind a wagon, another into the shadows, the last into a door that didn't exist moments before. Silence returns. The three of you stand there staring at nothing. Well, Desforges says finally, that was entirely improper. You glance at him, but perhaps necessary. He says nothing, just tugs the wig forward and walks into the night head high. Etienne watches him go, then turns to you. We have to write a report about this, don't we? You sigh. Only if we want it to be believed. Behind you, the Saint Laurent bells ring once more. Not to signal the hour, but you suspect simply to let the curls know they're still being heard. The following day is unnervingly calm. You arrive at the courthouse half expecting to find another powdered uprising, perhaps a wig hung from the banister in effigy, or a clerk screaming in rhyme. Instead, the building hums with quiet order. Candles flicker, quills scratch, and Desforges is seated at his bench, resplendent once more in his proper curls. Order is restored, he says mostly to himself, as he signs off on a water rights appeal with theatrical flourish. The curls have returned to their rightful perch. But you and Etienne know better. There's a new tension in the air, not open rebellion, but awareness. The kind that makes people glance over their shoulders when writing decrees or double-check their powder tin before stepping into chambers. You and Etienne begin quietly monitoring for further signs of Frisian activity. At first, nothing seems out of place. Proceedings resume. Petty complaints pile up. A tax dispute over beetroot is resolved without shouting. The goat from 2 hearings ago is reclassified again, this time as civic companion. But then small anomalies begin to creep in. The notary office receives a sealed envelope containing a single hairpin and a quote. The truth curls toward those who dare brush it. The head clerk of registrations reports his ceremonial sash went missing overnight, replaced with a silk ribbon tied in the shape of a question mark. A judicial stamp is discovered powdered, not used, just dusted, lovingly, as if by an invisible wig whisperer. Historians still argue whether these events were signs of an active Frisian underground or simply nervous paranoia fueled by excessive starch inhalation, Etienne says mid-note-taking, as he eyes his own inkpot suspiciously. You investigate. The wigmaker Lucien has started wearing gloves indoors and humming ominous melodies as he sorts curls by ethical alignment. Leftward lean for liberty, he mutters. Rightward for, tax collectors, I suppose. He insists he's had no more contact from the gentle frizz, but admits his lavender supplies have mysteriously doubled. He doesn't ask questions. Desforges is behaving differently. Not in an obvious way. He still blusters and coughs with civic flair, still adjusts his robes as if they're misbehaving curtains. But he hesitates before signing. He asks more questions, and once a petitioner leaves the chamber weeping softly, clutching a decree of forgiveness. That's new. He's afraid of them, Etienne says, or of becoming their next poem. You examine the recovered wig. The small red thread stitched into the lining remains neat, quiet, impossible to unsee. Desforges claims it's a reinforcement seam. You and Etienne know it's a signature. Then one afternoon, a crowd gathers outside. A street performer cloaked in gray stands atop a barrel, reciting court proceedings in verse. Not mockery performance. He reads a list of recent judicial decisions as haiku, including 3 goats, 1 dispute, the fence not tall but justice measured in hay bales. The crowd applauds. Someone tosses a powdered ribbon. Desforges watches from a window, says nothing. Later, in a quiet corner of the record chamber, Etienne finds a scroll tucked beneath a ledger. It contains nothing but a single sentence inked in lilac. To wear a wig is not the same as hearing the wind it deflects. You both sit in silence for a moment. Then Etienne mutters philosophy disguised as fashion. You return to your paperwork. But that evening, as you're leaving the office, you spot something peculiar on the statue of Lady Justice in the courtyard. A wig, not an official one, not even a replica. A handmade piece of twine and lace dusted in chalk and lemon powder. Silly. Lopsided, but unmistakably respectful. No note. No name. Just a gesture. You and Etienne don't speak of it, and neither does Desforges. But the next morning, he wears his curls slightly looser, less stiff, more breathable. Something is changing, quietly, curled at the edges, curled at the sun. Rain returns to Paris, not a proper storm, just the sort of misty drizzle that feels like the sky has decided to sulk. Cobblestones shine, slick wigs sag slightly at the edges, and couriers grumble as ink runs on legal notices mid-delivery. You arrive at the courthouse soaked at the shoulders, the umbrella vendor, having once again adjusted his hours to follow the poetry of weather. Inside, all seems routine, until Etienne intercepts you with a grave expression and an even graver scroll. It's addressed not to Desforges, but to the court of all curls. You break the seal lilac wax, pressed with a symbol resembling a powdered puff in mid-swirl. The message reads, "Some wigs are borrowed. Some were never theirs to claim." The trial of the thief begins at dusk. The gentle frizz. Etienne's face is pale. They're holding a trial. You both look at one another for a long, stunned second. This is no longer simply a protest. This is mimicry. A mirror court outside the bounds of law, complete with proceedings. They're not mocking authority, they're replacing it. Historians still argue whether this event marked the first unofficial trial held by a theatrical political wig collective, or merely a very elaborate hoax by disgruntled apprentices. Etienne mutters, already tying his scarf dramatically. You spend the rest of the afternoon collecting intelligence. The trial of the thief is whispered about in alleyways and back rooms. The accused supposedly is one of their own, a Frisian, who allegedly sold a ceremonial wig for personal gain. The irony is not lost on you. "We gave voice to the voiceless," says one informant nibbling on a mint biscuit. But some folks just want to shout for themselves. The trial is to be held in the abandoned printworks on Rue des Cendres, a soot-stained building that once produced satirical newsletters and now hosts poetry readings and apparently rogue judiciary experiments. You arrive just before dusk. Inside, candlelight flickers across makeshift benches. The audience is a strange cross-section: clerks, bakers, actors, even a few former petitioners, all seated in silence. No one speaks above a whisper. A sense of reverence hangs thick as powder. The judges are 3 frizz members wearing wigs of absurd proportions, one adorned with dried herbs, another with miniature scrolls, the third topped with a bird's feather nest. They call the accused a man in a shabby cloak, eyes darting curls too tightly wound to be natural. The charge: selling a Class 2 ceremonial wig to an aristocrat in exchange for a silver watch and 3 tickets to Les Petites Cannons, an operetta about cannonballs in love. "Wig for vanity," intones one judge. "Wig for gain. You curled your tongue and sold our mane." The room hums with discomfort. Etienne leans toward you. "It's real. This is real law. Just sideways." The man pleads, says he needed the money. that the wig was too grand for protest, that curls alone do not feed a family. The judges nod solemnly, then ask him to recite his favorite line of judicial satire. He does. It's a parody of Desforges' infamous "Let there be quiet" changed to "Let there be compliant silence." The room exhales. They pardon him. Not because the crime was excusable, but because they say every curl must untangle somewhere. A ripple of approval flows through the crowd. And then someone stands up. Desforges. You gasp. He's removed his official robe, still wearing the red-threaded wig, but dressed plainly, eyes alert. No gavel, no inkwell. He says nothing at first. Then justice is not a garment, but perhaps it can be woven. The room stares. Then someone claps. Then another. And then everyone, even the accused. You and Etienne watch as Desforges nods to the judges, then exits as quietly as he entered. His boots echo against stone. Outside, the rain has stopped. Back at the courthouse the next morning, a new decree appears on the public board. It reads, all rulings must be signed with a stamp of judgment and a grain of curiosity. Powder optional. You look at Etienne. He shrugs. It's better than nothing. The air in the courthouse feels lighter now, as if someone finally opened a window that had been nailed shut for a century. Desforges hums softly as he signs a ruling about chicken coop proximity regulations, his wig perched jauntily, less crown, more companion. But you and Etienne know better than to mistake stillness for peace. Things have changed. The gentle frizz may be quiet, but their shadow lingers. And today, it's about to get a little longer. You're in the central archive room, reorganizing the M-files. Notaries, noise complaints, mysterious fogs, when Etienne uncovers a small scroll tucked behind the binding of Manual of Proper Wig Etiquette Revised Edition. It's unsigned, but the paper smells unmistakably of lilac. You count the curls, but forget the heads beneath. The ledger must tilt. You sit back on your heels. Another message. Another nudge. This one less mischievous, more instructive. Like a tutor disguised as a saboteur. Etienne frowns. They're pushing us. Testing how far we'll lean before we fall. The message is followed by another discovery. A book has gone missing from the archives. Not just any book. The official record of Improper Rulings, Volume 1. A rarely opened volume used mainly for educational ridicule, it documents judicial missteps from centuries past. Errors in judgment, unfair penalties, notable courtroom collapses. A catalog of failure. And now it's gone. Historians still argue whether this theft was symbolic or part of a broader campaign to rewrite the narratives of civic shame, Etienne mutters, as he begins an emergency index of remaining controversial tomes. You check the lending log. No one has checked out anything under improper, since a board clerk once borrowed Volume 3 to press flowers. You interview the scribes. One claims she saw a man with chalk on his fingertips leave the archive room late last night. Another says she heard humming. Not a hymn, a lullaby, but powdered. That evening, you and Etienne visit the courtyard of reflection. A quiet stone square behind the archives, rarely visited except by pigeons and over-caffeinated interns. There's a small bench, a broken sundial, and today a scroll pinned to a lantern post. It contains a list. No heading, just names. But you recognize them, every clerk, scribe, and judge who issued a questionable ruling in the past 6 months. Next to each name is a small symbol, a curlicue, a spiral, a feather, a star. You frown. Are these ratings? Etienne reads silently, then says, "It's an honor roll. for justice, or a shame roll. But the symbols aren't cruel. They're curious, cryptic. Some names are marked with multiple shapes, some with none. Beneath the list, a final note. The Book of Errors is not a threat. It is a mirror. But some reflections must be carried into the street. You sit on the bench as dusk settles in. Desforges joins you later unannounced, holding 2 cups of thick, lukewarm chocolate. He's wearing his usual curls, but they've been brushed out, slightly less rigid, more lived in. "I was wrong," he says. You blink. "I thought the wig was everything. But the wig is only a permission slip. What matters is what you do with it. Or what you hear when you're not wearing it." He sips. "Also, someone replaced my shoe polish with vanilla custard. You don't ask." The next day, a quiet change occurs. Archives. A new shelf appears marked "Unusual Rulings" and the contexts that forged them. The missing book is returned anonymously with a note in the margin that reads, "Failure is not disqualification. It is proof that someone tried." Desforges approves the shelf without comment. He even adds a volume of his own wigless wisdom, 3 Days of Silence and The One Goat That Changed My Mind. Sales are moderate, but the tone of court has shifted. More reflection, less pomp, still powdered but with a wink. And behind it all, the frizz remains invisible, watchful, patient. It's a Tuesday morning when the next ripple arrives, not with a bang, but with a perfectly folded linen napkin. It's left on Etienne's desk. No note, no name. Just the napkin embroidered in delicate cursive with a single phrase, "The mayor gets involved." You and Etienne look at each other. Well, he says, that's never good. Indeed, it isn't. By mid-afternoon, a summons arrives from the Hôtel de Ville, the grand and glowering heart of municipal governance. It's not just for Desforges. It's for all parties affected by the recent follicular misplacements. Etienne reads it aloud in a monotone voice. That would be us. The 3 of you, Desforges, Etienne, and you, set out in a borrowed carriage. The weather is overcast, which feels appropriate. The horses clip-clop like they know they're carrying paperwork with legs. The Hôtel de Ville is vast and too polished, like someone tried to clean history off the walls. Inside, marble floors echo with footsteps full of intent. A clerk in livery leads you to a vast hall where a panel of municipal officials awaits. Their wigs are pristine, unnaturally symmetrical, and possibly reinforced with starch spite and ambition. The mayor himself is seated in the center, tall, waxy, and wearing a powdered monstrosity that looks more like a decorative vase than a hairstyle. He does not smile. Magistrate Desforges, he begins, "We are aware of the situation." Desforges bows. "We have taken appropriate steps. You've inspired mimicry," the mayor cuts in. "Do you understand the danger of theatrical justice?" Etienne leans forward and leans. "Sir, respectfully." Respectfully, the mayor interrupts. The city's legal authority now has fan mail. He slaps down a stack of letters. You can see the lilac wax from here. Some are poems. Others are full transcripts of shadow trials. One includes a small pressed wig made entirely from rabbit fur and dried herbs. "They've reached the tax offices," the mayor growls. Someone tried to pay their fines with a haiku. You wince. Desforges tries to explain that this isn't rebellion, it's a recalibration. That the court is still functioning. That the robes remain ironed and the gavel still commands at least mild respect. But the mayor isn't buying it. Justice, he says, must be boring, predictable, beige. You pause. You've seen a lot of things in the past few weeks, but never beige justice. Etienne mutters, Historians still argue whether this meeting marked the ideological schism between civic order and the poetic reorder. The mayor continues. You will issue a formal denouncement. You will restore solemnity. And you will find the people behind the gentle frizz. Quietly. Desforges nods stiffly. You can practically hear his joints creak under the pressure. The meeting ends with the mayor waving you off like a bad smell. Back in the carriage, silence reigns until Etienne finally says, "We're not going to denounce them, are we?" Desforges sighs. "We are going to appear to denounce them." And so begins the great performance. The next day, a proclamation is posted to all citizens, petitioners, and theatrical troublemakers. The Court of Paris reaffirms its dedication to structure, sobriety, and serious faces. The recent follicular anomalies are not condoned. Curls are not currency. Satire is not law. Kindly resume your roles. Magistrate Desforges, with unshaken authority, slightly dusted, but you know what happens next. That very evening, the proclamation is replaced by a printed response, same size, same format. But in lilac ink and signed The Gentle Frizz, it reads, "Structure is a coat. Justice is the wind. Curls remain optional, but listening is not." You and Etienne watch as a small crowd gathers, reads, and slowly disperses. No one cheers, but a few smile. Desforges steps beside you, arms crossed, curls still intact. "They know we're pretending," he says. "Good," you reply. "So do we." By now, the courthouse has entered a strange new phase, half judicial office, half performance venue, one-third existential salon. Math has stopped behaving normally here. The proclamations continue back and forth like letters between old enemies who secretly admire each other's penmanship. Today, you find a new one tacked to the back of the door to the records annex, where no proclamation has ever dared to go. It's written on parchment, dyed pale rose in cursive, that looks suspiciously like it was written mid-giggle too many commissions. If a matter cannot be solved by one commission, add 3 more. Then let the confusion bloom. Also, you left your wig brush in the bakery. GF. You sigh. This one hits a little too close. Because it's true in response to mounting pressure from the mayor's office, and likely just to look busy, Desforges has created no fewer than 7 special commissions. 7. They include the Committee for Wig Stability, the Interim Subcommission on Civic Wig Decorum, the Temporary Bureau of Powder Alternatives, the Working Group on Courthouse Aesthetics Subsection, Curls, the Cross-Departmental Panel on Satirical Threat Detection, the Official Inquiry into Judicial Lint, and of course the Advisory Council on Advisory Councils. None of them have met yet. 3 have issued mission statements. 1 is still debating its name. 1 accidentally approved a pastry stand license that now blocks access to the magistrate's private stairwell. You and Etienne attend the first and possibly last meeting of the Wig Stability Committee. It lasts 12 minutes and ends when someone sneezes into a powdered sample and declares it spiritually compromised. Historians still argue whether these commissions were sincere attempts at control or subconscious theater. Etienne says chewing a leftover biscuit labeled for quorum use only. Even Desforges is starting to crack. He calls a midweek staff meeting and opens it by slamming a gavel onto a tray of stale macarons. These commissions, he says, are multiplying like unattended rabbits in a storage closet. No one argues. You suggest maybe it's time to simplify. Desforges sighs and slumps slightly in his chair. I tried to create structure, but all I've created is overcooked bureaucracy with decorative frosting. He removes his wig, briefly sets it on the table, and stares at it. Do you know what this is? He asks. Etienne ventures a semi-symbolic fuzz crown. Desforges doesn't laugh. It's an apology, in fabric form. That evening, the Frizz responds. They post not a proclamation, but a drawing crude, charming inked onto the side of a flour sack and hung from the courthouse gates. It depicts a circle of wigs arranged like a wreath. In the center, a pair of ears. Just ears. No text. No explanation. You and Etienne stare at it in silence. It's not a rebellion anymore, he says. It's a conversation. Inside the courthouse, the commissions quietly begin to disband. Some members migrate to more productive tasks. Others simply vanish back into their usual duties, relieved to stop using words like powder equity and jurisprudential fluff ratios. Desforges issues a final decree, henceforth no more than one commission may be active at a time. Exceptions goat-related emergencies and plague logistics. You post it outside. Hours later, a sticker appears below it. In lilac ink, of course. It says, fair enough. It starts as many strange things do these days with a festival. Paris loves a reason to light a torch, throw a ribbon, and pretend for a day that bureaucracy isn't hanging by a powdered thread. This festival, the Feast of Slightly Improved Drainage, commemorates the opening of a new sewer vent near the Perfume Quarter, an annual civic triumph. The whole courthouse is expected to attend. Desforges arrives in full regalia robe, starched wig, recurled, a gold-plated ladle in hand for symbolic drainage scooping naturally. Etienne wears a tie that hasn't seen sunlight since the last census. You are handed a sash reading, Observer of Water Matters, which sounds important, but mostly makes you sweat. The procession winds through the streets with dull fanfare tambourines, some reluctant pigeons, and a brass band that seems unsure of its key. Everything appears normal until you reach the central fountain. There, perched high on the statue of civic prudence, is a wig. Not just any wig. Desforges' wig. The very same that was ceremoniously returned, worn through compromise, and believed to be safely perched on his head right now. Desforges gasps and instinctively touches his scalp. He is in fact bald, very bald. You stare in disbelief at the statue's head. The wig is styled perfectly and adorned with tiny banners bearing Frisian symbols, spirals, feathers, and one disturbingly accurate cartoon of Desforges mid-cough. Etienne murmurs, but we were with him all day. You look at Desforges. He's shaking. I wore it this morning, he says. I remember adjusting the second curl for optimal dignity. It's gone. Somehow without notice. Replaced by a decoy wig of excellent craftsmanship, but inferior emotional weight. No note, no fanfare. Just one smug curl fluttering in the breeze. The crowd erupts in laughter. But not cruel laughter. Warm, knowing laughter. And then cheers. For the first time in recorded legal memory, a stolen wig inspires applause. Desforges stands frozen, not out of shame but wonder. Then a boy tugs on your sleeve and offers a folded card. It smells faintly of almond oil and satire. You open it. Inside, scrawled in poetic prose, we do not steal what you protect. We borrow what you forget to treasure. A wig worn out of habit is no longer a symbol. A wig stolen, placed, admired becomes legend. Yours again. But not yet. GF. You read it aloud. The mayor's assistant faints quietly beside a pretzel cart. Later that evening, the wig is returned again. This time tied to the tail of a papier-mâché goose delivered anonymously during a chamber music recital. Desforges retrieves it personally. He places it on his head and says nothing, just nods once and resumes conducting business as usual. But his rulings that week are different. He allows more leniency, asks more questions, grants a permit to a puppeteer once accused of excessive whimsy, Historians still argue whether this wig snatching during the feast of slightly improved drainage marked the official beginning of performative jurisprudence in the Parisian court system, Etienne notes, as he updates the event ledger. In the hallway outside the magistrate's chambers, someone has painted a small mural, a powdered wig floating like a cloud above a street lamp with the words, "Let the curls travel." Desforges doesn't erase it. No one does. And each day afterward, people pause, smile, and move on, quietly reminded that power, when taken too seriously, curls in on itself. By now, the court has entered what Etienne refers to with fond resignation as the age of finger-pointing and fainting. The phrase is not metaphorical. In the past week alone, 5 wigs have vanished briefly and reappeared in odd places: a roof beam, a tax ledger cabinet, the top of a mechanical duck sculpture. Each incident sparks panic, blame, and inevitably fainting. The fainting trend begins with Madame Laforge, head of the Legal Weights Division, who swoons dramatically upon discovering her ceremonial curls dipped in rosewater and reinterpreted into spiral braids. Then come the accusations. One clerk accuses another of colluding with the frizz. The accused, flustered and powdered beyond reason, demands a scent test of all court documents. A junior scribe attempts to flee the room and promptly faints into a pile of powdered biscuits. You and Etienne draft a memo to all court personnel: please stop fainting directly onto valuable files. Please stop accusing others without evidence or at least rhyme. Please stop using courtroom ink to write passive-aggressive poetry. Management mildly serious. Again, Desforges tries to calm the hysteria with an address to the entire courthouse. He climbs atop the main staircase, curls freshly set, robes dramatically windswept, and says, "We are not actors, we are instruments of order." A faint applause. Then someone sneezes and a nearby clerk collapses into a decorative fern. Later that day, the Council of Floor Health and Dignified Posture is formed. It does not last the afternoon. Meanwhile, a new poem appears, this time on the reverse side of a bailiff's grocery list. The curls are not the crime, but the silence they protect might be. Look not at the thief. Look at what they left you fearing. Etienne reads it twice. They're shifting the focus, he murmurs. It's no longer about wigs. It's about fear. About who's not speaking. Who's not allowed to. You nod. The gentle frizz has grown more philosophical. Their interventions are quieter now, but sharper. Less about powdered spectacle. More about absence. Wigs appear with pages missing from court rulings. Ribbons show up tied around office chairs, empty chairs. Silent reminders of petitioners who never got answers, who couldn't read or couldn't wait. Even Desforges starts noticing. During one hearing, a woman from the outer districts requests aid for flood repairs. Technically, she's too late. Her petition expired 3 days prior. The rules say no. Desforges pauses, looks down at his ink-stained decree, then signs it anyway. Exception granted, he says softly. Sometimes the clock is wrong. No one argues. Back in the scribe room, someone's been placing scented cloths on the backs of chairs, one for each scribe who's stayed late. A gesture of thanks. They smell like lilac and old ink. Historians still argue whether this period marked a subtle uprising or simply the flowering of emotional hygiene within a stagnant legal system, Etienne notes as he carefully archives the latest fainting report. You find a new message taped to the base of the broom closet. Not every absence is theft. Some are invitations to pause. It's written on the back of an official document, stamped, signed, and never filed. The fainting slows, not because the court becomes less dramatic, but because the staff finally begins carrying little linen cushions in their coat pockets just in case. Desforges issues a mild decree banning unplanned collapses during civic announcements, which is promptly ignored. But beneath the powder, beneath the flourishes, something else is starting to stir. And it begins with a poem. Not from the frizz this time, from the janitor. His name is Claude. He's been sweeping the halls for over 2 decades, invisible in the way only essential people can be. One morning he pins a handwritten note to the notice board next to the court calendar. It reads, "I saw the wig fly once, not by wind, not by theft, but by boredom. It simply floated away because no one listened when it stayed. At first people chuckle, but then they stop. It's not funny. It's true." Historians still argue whether Claude's poem marked a cultural pivot or just revealed everyone's secret affection for janitorial wisdom, Etienne says solemnly, copying the poem into his now voluminous wig log. That afternoon, Desforges calls an impromptu meeting. He doesn't wear his wig. He arrives bareheaded, his hair surprisingly intact, wild with static and authority of another kind. The clerks freeze. A gavel is dropped. Someone drops a biscuit. The janitor coughs. "I've come to ask," Desforges says, "who we haven't heard from." A pause. Then softly, a clerk mentions a widow whose letters went unread. Another recalls a market vendor with no formal claim because her handwriting was too curly. Someone else admits a whole stack of petitions from non-French speakers was quietly placed in the complicated pile and never processed. Desforges writes it all down, on plain paper. No wig, no robe, just ink. The next morning, a new booth is installed near the front entrance. It bears no label, no title. Inside a chair, a table, and a clerk with a warm face. It becomes known unofficially as the listening booth. Anyone can come. No signatures required, no paperwork, just talking. Desforges assigns a rotating staff. 1 hour a day, then 2, then all morning. A woman from the textile district comes and weeps. A former stable boy requests help reading a bill. A group of children come in and demand longer public park hours. One of them gives Desforges a lollipop. He accepts it. No ruling is passed in the booth. No formal decisions. But in the hallway outside, the frizz leaves a note pinned with a gentle curl of copper wire. It is not the curls that mattered. It was the listening beneath them. The wig flew because it was worn without ears. You and Etienne sit on the courthouse steps at dusk, watching the last petitioners leave. He hands you a folded note he found tucked under the registry book. It reads, "When power listens, it needs fewer locks. No signature, no seal. But this time you don't need one. Because somehow it feels like the curls themselves have softened." A week passes with no stolen wigs. It feels suspicious. The courthouse, now accustomed to disruption, begins to feel too still. Desforges grows twitchy. Etienne keeps checking his ink for tampering. Even the pigeon that used to defecate symbolically on the magistrate's window has taken a break. But then, just as people begin to whisper that maybe the frizz has disbanded, something stranger happens. Not a theft, an addition. It begins with a quill. One morning, a clerk finds a new quill placed neatly on her desk. The feather is lilac dyed, the nib gold-tipped, the barrel carved with a spiral pattern. No one owns up to it. That afternoon, another clerk receives a set of parchment sheets thicker than regulation, subtly perfumed and watermarked, with the image of an open ear. By week's end, nearly every scribe and judge in the building has received something. A small tool, a polished ink pot, a fresh powder puff made of silk. All useful, all unnecessary, all beautiful, and none of them stolen. They're improving us, Etienne says, eyebrows raised. Gifting upgrades. You visit Lucien the court wigmaker, who's now become something of a folk oracle. He's reorganized his shelves by intent and greets you with the age of benevolent accessorizing. He shows you a package that arrived for him anonymously, fine lace edging for court wig linings all hand-stitched. Each one includes a small tag sewn into the seam. Listen better, sit straighter, speak slower. GF. Historians still argue whether this phase of frizz activity constituted reform infiltration or an elaborate etiquette workshop masquerading as anarchy, Etienne says, as he logs the deliveries in a notebook now so thick it requires its own chair. The gifts prompt confusion. The mayor's office sends a messenger demanding to know if these unregulated luxuries represent bribery, subversion, or some kind of fashion revolution. Desforges sends back a one-line reply. They're not luxury, they're reminders. Meanwhile, word spreads. Citizens begin sending small items to the courthouse, not demands, but offerings: a poem on muslin, a plum tart in the shape of a spiral, a child's drawing of the judge who listened. Desforges displays it in his office. At the listening booth, traffic triples. A new clerk volunteers to help read letters aloud. A florist offers to bring fresh petals once a week because dignity deserves a scent. But still, the question lingers: where is the frizz? No new proclamations, no disappearances, just these soft, strange upgrades. Until finally, at the end of the month, a delivery arrives. A box addressed simply to the institution formerly known as DEF. Inside 42 hand-bound booklets, each one titled What We Heard. You open the first. It contains transcripts of anonymous statements gathered at the listening booth, unedited, unjudged. Each page holds a voice, small, sharp, shy, or furious. Complaints about taxes, about forgotten names, about how hard it is to be taken seriously without a stamp. One reads, I once brought a letter I couldn't read, and they asked why I was bothering them. Another, I lost a goat and my home in the same week. They only asked about the goat. And at the bottom of every page, this line: this is why the curls left. Etienne closes the book quietly. Desforges doesn't speak for a long time. When he does, it's barely a whisper. We weren't mocked. We were warned. You sit in silence for a while. Then Desforges picks up one of the new quills, the lilac-dyed one, and begins drafting something. A new form. A petition format. For those who cannot write. For those who were never heard. He titles it Form E1 Earliest Exception. You watch as he signs it bareheaded. Not because he lost his wig, but because for once he doesn't need it. The new Form E1 Earliest Exception is met first with skepticism, then confusion, then gratitude. It's unlike anything the court has issued before. Simple pictographic written in plain French with symbols for urgent, loss, I don't understand, and even please just listen. No stamps, no flourishes, no Latin. At first, it's mostly used by those too shy or weary to speak at the listening booth. Then others start using it too. An elderly man with shaking hands. A merchant who's never written a sentence in her life, a child applying for permission to build a community nest for the neighborhood storks. That last one is rejected but kindly, and with a drawing of a compromise. Desforges keeps a copy of each E1 in a small chest by his desk. He reads them at the end of everyday glasses perched low on his nose, wig perched slightly off-center, less symbol now, more old friend. And still no sign of the frizz. No proclamations. No curls tied to pigeons. No wigs vanishing. Just quiet. Too quiet. Until one morning a janitor sweeping beneath the magistrate's bench finds a package, wrapped in pale linen. tied with thread dyed the same purple-gray as dusk in Paris. Inside a wig. But not just any wig. It's not powdered, not curled. It's made from threads of parchment tightly woven, each strand handwritten with a different name, petitioners mostly. Some you recognize from Form E1s, others from the listening booth. Etched into the lining, this is what we carry. Now it's your turn. G.F. Desforges lifts the wig gently, reverently, and says nothing. But he doesn't wear it. Instead, he places it on a stand in the courthouse atrium. A plaque beneath it reads, "The People's Wig." Not to be worn, only to be remembered. The wig becomes something of a pilgrimage point. Citizens stop by to look sometimes, to leave notes beneath it. Letters of thanks, apologies, doodles, small coins. One person leaves a lock of their own hair tied in ribbon. Lucien, the wig-maker, visits and weeps quietly. He later begins offering listening trims for free haircuts accompanied by silence and warm tea. You and Etienne sit in the atrium more often now, watching people come and go. Some touch the stand. Some just stand beside it. One afternoon, a woman in Baker's Whites leaves a tiny loaf shaped like a curled wig. It's terrible bread, but beautiful symbolism. Historians still argue whether the placement of the people's wig marked the end of the Frisian movement, or its quiet integration into civic life, Etienne says, now writing on archival parchment instead of cheap scrap. Desforges institutes a small but meaningful change. Every official court robe must now include a small inner pocket. Inside each pocket, a blank page. To remind us what hasn't been written yet, he says. He doesn't speak of the frizz anymore. But you know he thinks of them, especially when he pauses mid-ruling to look out the window for just a beat longer than necessary. A pigeon lands there sometimes. No scrolls, no wigs. Just quiet. And that's enough. The curls, it seems, are resting, or watching, or perhaps simply waiting. The court feels human now. Less theater, more dialogue. Less ink for show, more for substance. The once rigid routines of powdered ritual have softened into something that almost resembles empathy. You still have forms, you still have rules, but you also have moments. And it's in one of those moments that a change quietly begins. It starts with an old man, a former stonemason, with a limp and a voice like crumpled parchment, who arrives at the courthouse without a petition, without a complaint. He brings a chair, a folding one. He sets it outside the atrium facing the people's wig. When you ask what he's doing, he just says, waiting to be reminded. You think he's joking. He's not. He returns the next day, and the day after. Then two more join him, a seamstress and a boy with ink-stained fingers. They don't speak much. They just sit. And soon, without official permission or paperwork, there's a gathering. No chants, no protests, just presence. By the end of the week, a small circle of chairs surrounds the wig. Some are donated. Some are handmade. One is a crate. One is a stool shaped like a loaf of bread. They call themselves the Circle of Consideration. And they don't demand anything. They just listen. To passers-by. To one another. Sometimes to nothing at all. People start coming to them with worries. Petitions are read aloud and gently discussed before ever reaching the court. Some are improved. Some are torn up with a quiet nod. It becomes a pre-court, a kind of informal whisper chamber for what might matter most. Desforges never acknowledges it officially. But every so often, a fresh pot of tea appears on a crate beside the circle. No one sees who brings it. Historians still argue whether the Circle of Consideration functioned as a proto-civic salon or simply a comfortable place to sit on your day off. Etienne notes, watching from the chamber window. Meanwhile, a strange silence continues from the gentle frizz. No new riddles, no symbols, no mischievous curls. Just the soft aftermath of impact. But one evening, as you tidy up the Form E1 submissions, you notice something odd in the margins of a blank form. Just a faint watermark, almost invisible except in candlelight. It's a spiral, but not the frizz's usual curled emblem. This one is wider, looser, like something unwinding, exhaling. Beneath it, in ink so pale you almost miss it. When the curls go quiet, it's not surrender, it's trust. You show it to Etienne. He doesn't say anything at first. Then maybe they're leaving us alone, on purpose. That night you return to the atrium. The people's wig is still there. So are the chairs. So are the silences. You sit for a while. Someone you don't know sits beside you. Neither of you says anything. Because sometimes, even in a place built on words, silence is the final, most generous petition. The atrium has become the new heart of the courthouse, not because of power, but because of quiet. The people's wig sits in its glass case like a sleeping idea. The circle of consideration gathers daily, and petitions arrive that no one would have dared submit a month ago. Desforges no longer reads from his rulings aloud, unless someone in the chamber doesn't read well. Etienne has stopped adding unnecessary flourishes to legal documents. He now signs his name in small letters and includes a doodle of a goat in the corner for luck. And you've stopped looking over your shoulder expecting feathers and lilac, because the frizz hasn't vanished. It's become habit. You begin to notice small, unannounced changes. A formerly unreadable legal notice rewritten in plain French, quietly tacked to the wall outside the archives. A petition from a group of laundresses not filed but sung, then transcribed by a clerk with surprisingly good musical notation skills. A powdered wig left on a public bench not stolen, just retired with a note tucked beneath. I've said enough. One morning, a new clerk named Bernard, a nervous fellow with a tragic mustache and 5 pens tucked into one sleeve, asks you how to process an E1 form, submitted with no words, just a drawing of a teacup and a cracked wall. You shrug. T. Infrastructure. Dignity. He nods, scribbles recommended repairs and a thank you, and stamps it. Approved. That afternoon, a delivery arrives addressed to the listening booth. It's a wooden box inside which is a neatly arranged pile of hair ribbons. No note, but each ribbon is tagged with a name. Not famous names, just citizens. Each one has a story attached: refused bread license, ignored wedding declaration, widow, waited 7 months. You and Etienne go through each one. They're all from unfiled petitions, some decades old, some from people no longer living. At the bottom of the box is a folded card. They asked to be heard. Now they'll be remembered. GF Final Archive Edition. Etienne exhales. They're closing the ledger. Desforges calls for a brief ceremony. No grand speeches. No fanfare. Just a quiet hour in the atrium. Each ribbon is placed into a small embroidered pouch stitched with the frizz spiral and stored beneath the people's wig in a drawer marked Echoes. That night, the circle of consideration reads aloud every name, not as records, not as complaints, but as acknowledgments, as whispers that shaped the walls around them. No proclamations appear the next morning. No curls go missing. No scrolls tied to livestock. Just a note placed on the magistrate's bench, printed on fresh parchment, with a new kind of seal, a blank circle. Inside it: if you must wear power, let it itch. If you must hold judgment, let it tremble. The frizz has gone, but you've been curled enough to carry it. You hold the note for a long while, then you fold it into your pocket and head back to work. The following morning, the courthouse feels almost normal. Almost. The wigs are all accounted for. The petitions are organized. Desforges is in his chair, not posturing, not proclaiming, just present. He stamps a decree with the quiet efficiency of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. You and Etienne sit in the atrium sipping weak coffee and watching the sunlight creep across the flagstones. The people's wig gleams faintly in its case ribbons undisturbed in their drawer. Then a clerk hurries over, flushed and panting, carrying a bundle wrapped in brown paper. It came from the ministry, he says. They said it's the final audit. You exchange a glance with Etienne. The audit. The mayor's office has been oddly silent since their last demand for order. But now they want proof of structure, of loyalty, of normalcy returned. They want numbers. How many petitions processed? How many hearings held? How many wigs unmolested? It's a test, and it's clear what they expect, something boring, beige, unimpeachably bureaucratic. You begin compiling. The data is precise if uncomfortable formal petitions processed. Down 28%. Rulings issued down 12%. Cases reopened after informal review, up 63%. Petitions submitted via E1 forms, up 470%. And yet, complaints withdrawn without pressure, up 44%. Resolutions reached through the listening booth alone, 86. Unprompted acts of civic kindness recorded, 21. Witnesses fainting from stress, down 100%. Wigs stolen. Etienne drafts a summary report with all the charm of a particularly warm ledger. Desforges, without comment, adds an addendum. During the period in question, authority was tested not by rebellion, but by suggestion. Some of those suggestions were scented. Some were curled. All were heard. He signs it, then pauses, and adds, "The court was improved. We didn't plan it, but we're keeping it." The audit is sealed and dispatched with the morning courier. The courthouse exhales. That afternoon, a group of neighborhood children arrives with a basket of fruit and a request for permission to paint the walls near the records room with important faces of listening. The petition is informal, illustrated, includes 3 bananas as tribute. Desforges grants it immediately. Later you walk past and see their early sketches, portraits of judges, clerks, and scribes with enormous cartoon ears and spirals in place of wigs. Etienne is depicted with a feather quill 3 times his height and a pigeon on his head. You're smiling in yours, which is rare. The children laugh, and behind their laughter is a kind of trust, the quiet kind. No proclamations are pinned up. No wigs go missing. No messages written in lilac appear beneath benches, but something else is left behind. A note, folded, placed under the lip of the people's wig's glass. No name, just 5 words, scrawled in ink that smells like memory. You did curl the court. It's raining again. Not a storm, just a gentle, even drizzle, the kind that seems to make everything slower, quieter, a little more fragile. Inside the courthouse, there are no declarations, no clamor, just the familiar tap of quills, the soft shuffle of parchment, the low murmur of voices doing work that matters. Desforges arrives without his robe. No one comments. He walks the hallway once, nodding to clerks, to petitioners, to a child napping beside the atrium heater. Then he enters his chamber, closes the door, and begins drafting what will be his final decree. You and Etienne stand in the atrium reading the day's posted items. One is a newly accepted petition from a goat sanctuary seeking formal recognition as emotionally significant. Another is a public thank you letter to the listening booth, written entirely in flowers, pressed between the pages of a cookbook. Then Desforges's door creaks open. He steps out, holding a single sheet. No wax seal, no ribbon, just ink. He walks to the case, holding the people's wig, opens the drawer labeled Echoes, and places the paper inside. You later read it when no one's looking. Decree of uncurled judgment. Let it be known that not all power must arrive powdered, that those who interrupt question or decorate the margins are not enemies of order, but its caretakers, that justice does not wear a costume, only a reminder, that any citizen given space and patience may rise into the kind of silence that helps others speak. I wore the wig because I thought it made me right, but it was when I lost it twice publicly, and in shame, that I finally began to hear. You are the curl now. Don't straighten too soon. He doesn't sign it. Doesn't need to. That night, the atrium is quiet. The chairs of the circle of consideration remain, even though their occupants have wandered off into the soft folds of normal life. One chair holds a folded coat. Another has a small jar of powdered sugar. The magistrate's bench is empty. The listening booth is still. A new form is introduced at the clerk's desk the next morning. It's called Form 01 Ongoing Thoughts. It has no deadlines, no specific purpose. Just a question at the top: what haven't we asked you yet? A child draws a spiral. An old woman writes, I'm still here. Someone else just leaves the space blank. Because sometimes that's enough. Because sometimes that's the answer. And now the wig rests, the spiral sleeps, and Paris carries on with a little less powder, a little more pause, and one or two gentle curls in the right direction. And now, as the last curls fade and the powdered echoes settle, let yourself drift gently away from the halls and chambers of that peculiar old courthouse. The marble floors, once echoing with clipped heels and clipped tempers, now rest in silence. The people's wig remains in its glass case, unworn, unclaimed, and entirely unforgettable. A testament not to who shouted loudest, but to who finally listened. The chairs remain too. Empty, maybe, but not forgotten. They hold the shapes of stories, the imprints of people who didn't know they had something to say until someone gave them room. Outside, the drizzle softens into mist. The city glows dimly, wrapped in its own quiet. Desforges has gone home, not to write, not to rule, just to sit, to breathe, maybe to listen to the rain through the cracked shutters, wondering genuinely gently what voices are rising now. And you've curled a little too, haven't you? Not your hair, your pace, your thoughts, maybe even your breath. So now close your eyes. Let the spiral unwind, not into disorder, but into rest. You've listened long enough. You've laughed just the right amount. And now you can let go. Because justice, as it turns out, is best delivered in a whisper. Sleep well, listener.